Hello again. Welcome back to the theatre. For those of you who are joining us today for the first time, my name is Georgia Close. I'm the Head of Learning here at the National Gallery. We hope you enjoyed your first round of workshops today, both on-site and in the online space. I am so excited to introduce our next guests who have travelled all the way to join us from the Columbus Museum of Art in Ohio to share an international perspective on the importance of museums as inclusive places for communities and community building, and the ways that museums can advocate for the rights of our youngest learners to access creative experiences within public space. The Columbus Museum of Art is a community hub where ideas are exchanged and different voices are heard, where curiosity and creativity are encouraged and nurtured, providing opportunities for people to cultivate and discover the value of creativity in their own lives. Brooke Minto is the Executive Director and CEO of the Columbus Museum of Art, taking on this role only in May 2023. However, Brooke's career within the arts has spanned more than 2 decades, both in the United States and internationally. In 2023, she was recognised by the American Alliance of Museums for her work advancing diversity, equity, accessibility and inclusion in the museums field. Before joining the Columbus Museum of Art, Brooke was the inaugural Executive Director of the Black Trustee Alliance for Art Museums, growing the organisation into a robust, non-profit membership organisation, equipping Black trustees with the resources to bring meaningful and lasting change to their organisations. Brooke has also, thank you. On behalf of Brooke. Brooke has also held senior leadership roles at the New Museum in New York, the New Orleans Museum of Art and the Pérez Art Museum in Miami. Brooke is joined by her colleague Jennifer Lehe, who is the Director of Learning Innovation at the museum. Jen leads learning programs for all ages and ensures the museum is continually reimagining, experimenting and evaluating towards deep impacts. Jen led the development of the Making Creativity Visible initiative, a 3-year research collaboration between the museum and classroom teachers, investigating ways to model, foster and assess creativity in K-12 settings. She is the project director of Cultivating Creative and Civic Capacities, an initiative of the Columbus Museum, Project Zero and classroom teachers to nurture student imagination, critical thinking and agency towards a better world. Jen also co-launched Wonder School, an artist-led preschool which is presented as a collaboration between the museum and the Columbus Childhood League Centre that sees children attend preschool at the museum and the League Centre as their preschool program. This program supports professional development of undergraduate early childhood teachers, fostering purposeful play, critical inquiry, and a collaborative community approach to education for children and their educators for a more creative and compassionate society. Please join me in welcoming Brooke and Jen to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Georgia. It's our pleasure to be here, and forgive me while I log in. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself while I get this done?
Sure, so there's not much more that I could say about myself after that robust introduction, but we are so thrilled to be here. It's been a delight to get to know all of you, and it is, and it is just such a joyful experience to come together with curious educators such as yourselves.
Yeah, it's really a tremendous honor to have been invited to present here at NVAEC 2024, and thank you to the entire NGA team for reaching out to us so early and for your deep work into the field that brought this to your attention. It's our pleasure to be here, and such an honor to get to visit the institution, see the collection, and to be in Australia for the first time for both of us. Also, thank you to Paul and Ruben yesterday for the incredible ceremony welcoming us to country. It's wonderful to participate in that work with you and to be able to bring back the memory of our ceremony to our colleagues back in Columbus. The Columbus Museum of Art sits on Native land. We remain grateful to all of you for your kind hospitality and want to acknowledge custodianship and continuous connection to that land. We also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we ordinarily live and work in Columbus, Ohio. Our museum rests on land traditionally stewarded by the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandotte, and Ojibwe peoples. People from these communities were violently removed from their homes by colonial settlers through war and the broken Treaty of Grenville. CMA is currently on a multi-year plan to understand how colonialism manifests in our museum and to reimagine our practices in reparative ways. We remain grateful to the Indigenous partners who are collaborating with us on these efforts. In thinking about the themes of the conference this year, we've been thinking, what does it mean to reposition the museum? What does that take? What does that look like at CMA?
So we're looking to share some of the ways that we've been experimenting in this space related to the themes of the conference. And our hope is that while our context may look very different from yours, that you will find some ideas that you can take away and adapt to your context, and also some things that just pique your curiosity about what repositioning could look like in your own practice. Before we go any further, though, for those of you who are in person, you got one of our favorite art making supplies on your way in, twist ties. If you're joining us virtually, I invite you to take a few seconds to grab whatever is nearby you, rubber bands, paper clips, Post-it notes, because we have a little bit of a creativity challenge to warm us up after lunch slump being as it is, but it's also one of our favorite ways to play and practice. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you to please imagine and create, you're only going to have 3 minutes, imagine and create something you think everyone will have in the future, but that no one has now. I see some nervous faces. Remember, we ask our students to do scary things every day. You could hear a pin drop in this room. My goodness. You all are teachers. I thought you wouldn't mind a chance to chat. Yeah. Do you want to just put this one?
Maybe. Let's try that.
Maybe one more minute to make. So this is your chance. And when they're finished, we're going to put them up on plinths in the museum. So it has to be really perfect, a beautiful creation. All right, so I'd love to just see by show of hands for those of you in the room, how many of you started by thinking about what you hope we will have in the future? Yeah. How many of you made something that you fear we will have in the future or fear we will need in the future? Yeah. So I love doing this activity, and if we were a smaller group with more time, I'd spend some time really digging into what you think that your creations say about your perception of the now and your perception of the future. But I want to just say a couple of things. One, playing with materials is how we practice. Playing is practicing, and artists show us this all the time. And that we cannot create what we cannot imagine. So taking these opportunities to practice in small ways, when you think about the themes of this conference and what we want our practice to embody, making sure that we are playing like artists as well. So please feel free to continue creating if that is part of your own practice. And we want to just share a little bit about what brought us each to here.
Yeah. And thank you again, Georgia, for those great introductions. I think as context for what we'll continue to talk about when we go deeper into examples of program at CMA, I thought it made sense to understand, what's defined our practice in museums to this point, and what we're bringing to our current work in Columbus. I'm originally a New Yorker, as Georgia mentioned. I started in the museum world as a curator, baby curator at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and my career has taken me to all different cities around the country and some abroad, which has been really an extraordinary experience. I spent 7 years in Miami at what's now the Pérez Art Museum Miami, and then 5 years at the New Orleans Museum of Art before returning to New York and joining the team at the new museum. For a couple of years before the pandemic, I was involved with the Zeitz Museum of Contemporary Art Africa in Cape Town, and then, as they mentioned, 8 months ago, joined the Columbus Museum of Art. Before I joined the Columbus Museum of Art, I spent 2 years working on the Black Trustee Alliance project that you heard a bit about. And it was in that context that I had the opportunity to consider leading the Columbus Museum of Art. And as I learned about it, I knew nothing about Columbus before I got there. I became quite admiring of not only the learning initiatives at the museum, but also the leadership and the staff who were very humbly in this sort of re-examination of the museum, its programs, its mission, and how it delivers for all of its publics. And so I was very tempted to move to the Midwest of the United States, an area I didn't know, and to take on the leadership of this project and to work with Jen and our other colleagues who were many years into this sort of reevaluation of the museum and its future directions.
And I'm here, but I'm also, I wanted to share some pictures in the background of some of the collaborators, the teachers, amazing collaborators we've had along this journey. Because when we started out asking, how can we really be relevant to our communities, we knew that we had to do that in conjunction with teachers. And so some of them are, just a small number of them are up on this slide. But I just want to say personally something that brings me to this work, that keeps me grounded in it, was that before I was in this museum, a long time ago at this point, I was that achievement-seeking, right answer-seeking student. And then when I left that very narrow path of schooling, I realized that it was training me in the exact opposite skills from what I needed to thrive, to take on complex challenges, to navigate ambiguity, and to be in community with others. And that is something that I always bring to this in this process of coming back to the question of what kinds of thinking are most important for a given learning situation and why, and having that be a purposeful dialogue.
So a little bit more about the museum. We see the museum as a catalyst, as a convener of curiosity, and a place for critical thinking and courageous imagination. As we plan and program for CMA, we consider how we engage our audiences in exciting, inclusive, and novel ways, and how we do that with our collections, our exhibitions, and our programming. And we think really deeply about what changes we need to make to enable that transformation. As I mentioned before, Columbus is a mid-sized city in the middle of the country. It is a relatively liberal city politically, but in a pretty conservative region. And so we're very thoughtful about the way in which we think about our program and how we speak to everyone that comes through the museum.
Yeah, we're not looking to create an echo chamber, but a place where people with genuinely diverse perspectives can come together and have conversations and make connections and experiences that they wouldn't otherwise have.
Over a decade ago, well in advance of my arrival at CMA, the museum adopted creativity as its big idea and made a significant investment into creativity as the starting place for innovation. This meant opening a dedicated center for creativity that's 18,000 square feet of our overall space at the museum. And at the time, in 2011, beginning to transform many of our approaches to programming across the museum. This meant doing away with 80% of the existing programming, eliminating it entirely and restarting from scratch with a new and intentional focus and with deeper research and further evaluation to guide the Center for Creativity into its future.
And so when you walk into the Columbus Museum of Art today, you're going to see throughout our building, throughout our galleries, lots of participatory provocations, tapping into different modalities, hands-on, written, verbal, all kinds of things. So opportunities for us to say, well, so what's the big idea here with this artwork, with this artist, and how does that connect to what is relevant for our learners? And museums are institutions of lifelong learners, and in many cases, we're designing for unfacilitated learning. So we might never meet the learner who is engaging with these, although we do lurk. We are definite spies in our own galleries, right? It's a good way to learn. Hopefully you are lurkers in your own contexts as well. But so inviting people in the top left, inviting people to subvert iconography from our own country in response to an exhibition of Soviet artists doing that same work. Places for people to connect. So in the center, we had an installation on isolation and social exclusion, and we didn't want people to walk away feeling disconnected and isolated. So we had a space with games so they could literally connect with other people. And a variety of other hands-on experiences, again, tapping into multiple modalities, creating a layered experience that is going to maximize the ways that people connect. And we call them connectors because they're designed to connect people with ideas, art, and one another.
As we think about creativity and the civic mindedness of our publics, and certainly of all the learners that come through the museum, we think about it in different ways. The everyday visitor experience is illustrated here. Maybe you'll tell us about these two examples.
Yeah, so this on the left is our Center for Art and Social Engagement, which was an Institute of Museum and Library Services funded initiative to take our social commentary collection. So we have this amazing collection of works from 20th century American artists who are responding to social issues. But we wanted to engage it in different ways that were more dynamic and playful. So this is in the same gallery as those games, this image on the left. But it was co-opting the language of social media, which at the time there was all this research coming out about how isolating and disconnecting, how bad it is for our mental health. So instead, we're using it this was pre-COVID, when you still wanted to move people close together. So to help people get to know one another in the context of the artworks. And then on the right, in response to an artwork that is a Huey Lee Smith piece looking at housing segregation in Detroit in the first half of the 20th century, we had this work up, and there's a prominent wall in the painting with graffiti. It's an image of someone graffitiing on one of these exclusionary walls. And we had this up at a time when in the United States, the idea of a wall was becoming very heated and connecting with themes of the border. So we invited people to say, we said a little bit about this work of art and what the artist was responding to. And we said, based on your experiences, what are some of the consequences of a wall? So those are examples of where we're taking some of our work with creativity, some of those experiments through the Center for Creativity, and we're bringing it together with civic mindedness, civic habits, looking around and saying, what are the gaps in discourse where we can be of value, not only to being relevant to our communities, but sort of these bigger questions of what a museum can be and do as part of the civic life of its community. And I also just want to say that a lot of these connectors have ended up in classrooms all over. So please steal ideas from us. Ideas are for stealing.
So in addition to the visitor experience, we're also thinking about creativity and civic mindedness with regard to the permanent collection. On the screen is an image from a recent installation in our contemporary art galleries of works, a promised gift of works from the Scantlin family collection, all of which are emerging and mid-career artists of global origin. And it's one of many installations where we're really thinking about some of the strengths of the collection. Our collection has deep strengths in social commentary, and how we might reset those conversations in a contemporary context for our audience. In addition to the permanent collection, we're also thinking about this in special exhibitions. This is a show, Sarah Rosalina in All Directions, of an LA-based artist of indigenous descent. Her work collapses both native traditions of weaving and clay coil pot making with a deep interest in tech, in AI, and space colonization. So the past and the present and the future coming together.
And then, of course, in our learning programs. So bringing together the civic and creative in the learning programs. And I could talk about our learning programs forever, but I won't, I promise. But we did want to focus in on one example that was mentioned in the introduction, which is it was an opportunity for us to go super deep. And you can't always take those opportunities. You can't go deep into everything. So this question of smart sampling, like a lot of art museums, we had early learning programs, we had preschool collaborations, and they were amazing. And it's such a key age to intervene. And we just kept, for decades, we were doing early childhood programming, and we kept on asking, well, what if? We are always going to be a relatively small organization. Well, I don't know, who knows? Who knows what the future holds? Maybe one of you made a twist tie sculpture of a gigantic Columbus Museum of Art. At any rate, we are a small team, but what we can do is we can demonstrate what it can look like and hold ourselves to all these same standards that teachers and early learning centers are accountable to, but to show how it can look when you really take seriously the mind of the child and the potential when you bring together creative and civic mindedness. And so about 6 years ago, we launched the Wonder School, which is a laboratory preschool. It is in collaboration with our community college partners. So this is like a TAFE, I am told by Google. So we have 12 to 15 children who are 3 to 5 years old. And then we have every semester 10 community college students. So this is a range of non-traditional and straight out of high school teachers who need to go through this program to get licensed to teach in early childhood settings. So we are accountable to all the same standards of any center, and we are a 5-star quality, which means we've the top tier of quality. And it's tempting to focus on those 3 to 5 year olds. Their minds are so beautiful. But it's really also about that ripple effect. And so this date, we've had over 100 student teachers go through this experience. And again, the mission, I know it was up on the screen, but for those who might not have seen it, purposeful play, critical inquiry, and a collaborative community approach to education. So what can this look like? We're engaged in all the same kinds of learning that you would, we're meeting all the standards, right? But instead of doing something fun and creative and then turning and giving an assessment, we have rubrics and we train the student teachers to be on the lookout for these early childhood markers, these indicators of learning, so that it's really integrated and it's really child-driven. We have a classroom in a center for early learning that is just up the street from us, and one day a month they're with us at the museum. I shamelessly just wanted to share a lot of pictures of how beautiful it is. We're always bringing adults there and they say, oh, can I sign up? Can I enroll? And so this is filtered through this dual lens of thinking like an artist and thinking with art. And it's not only those little kids, but also those big kids. And it can be a lot of learning because it isn't how they were taught, and it wasn't, by and large, how they were taught to teach. But by creating that immersive experience, they can practice working through it. So what does it look like to dig into these civic capacities with our youngest learners? So sometimes that is working through issues in the classroom. So some of our classrooms are little microcosms of democracy, and they are little communities. And so, for instance, and everything we do is driven by the interests and curiosities of the children. So we were exploring the galleries with them, and they found this Nick Cave sound suit, which they decided was king, right? Very regal. It makes sense to see him as a king. And then it turned out over time, as we brought documentation back into the classroom, that the king was lonely. The kids thought, he looks lonely, he's all by himself. Well, why might he be lonely? And the children are so empathetic, and they are so willing to adopt these different perspectives. And so in parallel, there were some things unfolding, some big feelings, including over ownership of things, mine. And so a whole narrative emerged back and forth between the student teachers, our teaching artists, and the children about the king and why he was sad, because there was this more beast who wanted all of the things, and this phenomenon sweeping the kingdom of the sticky means, where bad moods seemed to be contagious, right? So sometimes these experiences are really about how we are engaging with the civic life of the classroom. Sometimes it is about looking beyond the classroom walls. So in one notable experience, they were looking at this George Tooker painting, and they thought, well, you know, he looks scared. Maybe because he's really high up. We could throw him a rope. We could give him bouncy shoes. Let's build him a water slide. So moving from that compassion, that perspective taking, and when you see that work in real life, it is genuinely, it's intense. And the children immediately empathized with and wanted to help this child. And so then the emergent curriculum became, okay, well, so what do we do to help these young people to move their compassion to action? And so this is June, creating a ladder, and it says on the left, our teachers often will write down the words of the children. So I climbed up, and then I climbed back down, and I threw a rope, and he came down the rope, and then he hugged me, right? And it's a hug. And this is actually, it's of a piece with a big theme in Wonder School every year, which is upstanders. What does it mean to be an upstander? And in fact, June's creation is on this documentation panel alongside, for instance, picture book covers and photographs of real life individuals who stood up to injustices. We have a very thoughtful approach to bringing in picture books and sharing examples of especially people from within communities, but in ways that are designed to help grow this feeling of upstanding in the young children. And sometimes what engaging civic matters in Wonder School looks like is taking on topics that are really scary and hard for grown-ups, as in the case with this documentation, where we worked with the Indigenous Peoples Day Toolkit from the Student Ignition Society of Raising Luminaries. They have this allegory of taking land and then generations moving and then living on that land. This is something that if you try, I mean, it was very perplexing for a lot of adults when we said we were going to undertake this. And when I say we, I'm giving all credit to my team, especially Kat Lynch, who's our lead teaching artist, and Melanie Adams, who's the lead faculty from Columbus State, and also the amazing group that made this resource, which I'm happy to share the link to. But really having the opportunity to approach these topics in different ways, where if you tried to confront it directly, it would break down before it even started. But you know, what are the big ideas? Maybe the specific thing, maybe we can't talk about that right now for whatever reason, but what are the themes that relate? And this is a very art learning kind of idea, because our themes, one of the premises of museums is that ideas speak across time and place and context. But as educators, we have to help make that happen. And so we recently had a reconvening, a sort of reunion of some of the student teachers who had gone through the Wonder School experience to find out what were they working on now, what really still stuck with them. And it was amazing to have that conversation, but I just wanted to point out a few quotes from that that speak to the sort of what's going on with the student teachers as they're approaching these civic topics through creativity. So this idea that having conversations with young children about complex civic topics was something they never thought they could do, but by doing it, it helped them to do so with other adults. This connection to children's rights that comes when you really tune in. You know, this is not a lecture-based class. This is not someone telling the children what they should think about these topics. It really is an emergent curriculum. And really advocating to keep the focus on the child, empowered this student teacher to bring that back. This was a student teacher who was already working in an early childhood center. And so doing those two experiences together was able to come back. And then, you know, this observation that many of you have maybe made, that kids can actually take on a lot more than we think if we support them in the right ways. And so all of this process, again, the work that we do, we take it on as our own learning as well. And so looking at the investigations of the young children and of the student teachers really drove us to this new question that we will probably be noodling with for years, if not forever, of how can thinking like an artist and thinking with art help us to collectively create something better than what we inherited.
Thank you, Jen. I think after looking at that program in deep detail, especially the Wonder School, I think it's time we zoom back out a little bit and look at some bigger picture institutional issues. As I mentioned earlier, we are in a transformative process called Museum in Progress. CMA is on a reflective journey to better understand and address the historical and ongoing harm done by not only our museum, but museums in general in our country. And we do this in partnership with a number of organizations and individuals around Columbus. We do so with humility and imagination, engaging our public, this process of real self-reflection as we think about and plan for the future of the museum. In addition to our programming for learners of all ages, we've been thinking about the collection. CMA has for many years been a leader in American art in our country. Our collection has over 15,000 objects and great depth in American art. But we've been thinking lately, what is the American story that we're telling? How is it defined? Who have we left out? And certainly it's, part of one of my deep interest over the next several years to really reevaluate the collection and come up with a strategy and a long-term plan for correcting this narrative and really rethinking our American art galleries and what they look like and how we interpret the story of our country for our public. Did you want to say something about these two connectors? Actually, you should.
Sure. Yeah, so on the left here, this picture was from maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where we had this American Stories gallery, and we were sort of like, which American stories do we mean when we say this? And so our first foray, again, in that experimentation, just like all of you experiment in your classrooms, in your contexts, we had a participatory station where we acknowledged the name of the gallery. This gallery is called American Stories. What is your American story? And we had different prompts. My American story is, my American story began, my American story blank. And it was just amazing to see the responses. And we collected many of them and looked at them. And what we also see is asynchronous conversation over time, visitors responding to one another's stories. A couple of years later, in 2020, we reinstalled that gallery in a deliberate way. So now you have Native American artists alongside non-Native artists and a wider range of racial representation as well.
More recently, we hosted an exhibition that was traveling around the States of an artist, Wendy Redstar. We were very fortunate to present this work in the Midwest. What's on the screen here is a work called Let Them Have Their Voice. And while that wasn't a work included in the exhibition, we felt it was really important to acquire for the collection a work by Wendy to not only commemorate the time that we had the show on view in Columbus, but also to continue this reinterpretation of the American art story in our galleries. This particular work is resonant in that we have for many years stewarded several photographs by Edward Curtis as part of the photography collection at CMA. And I think this particular acquisition at this time really reflects our commitment to further developing the institution's indigeneity plan. And so this is a work that we're now thinking about how we work it into the reinterpretation of the American art collection. In addition to this work, we also have a gift that the museum received many years ago of over 400 works of Native American artists in the southwestern part of the United States, which we will plan to research further and publish scholarship on in the years to come.
And if I could just say as an aside, I don't know how well known Edward Curtis is in Australia, but he was a white settler descended person who went around photographing Native Americans in a real just hodgepodge of clothing, no respect for the ways that people wanted to be represented or whether the items they were wearing were even from their nations. And those works kind of shaped the American imagination, the white American imagination of Native Americans, and were kind of used as a document for this impression of a people going extinct. So these were deeply problematic but widely accepted for a very long time. And now there are much more responsible conversations happening in the field about how harmful these works are, but they still sit in many collections and on display in many museums. So this work by Wendy Red Star, who's Apsalica, is a really important, as Brooke said, a really important response, in addition to being a significant work in and of itself. And so we also wanted to bring these contemporary and local perspectives to the ways that we engage people with art and ideas. And so as part of our Museum in Progress, we have an initiative. We have internal behind-the-scenes plans, some of which we make publicly available so our community can help keep us accountable, but also experiences where we've developed relationships with partners who we then bring into the museum for experiences to help engage our visitors with these complex topics. So, for instance, we worked with a local environmental activist, Shelley Corbin, to create a companion set of audio recordings to accompany the Wendy Red Star exhibition, which was a traveling exhibition. But we knew there was an opportunity to bring other stories into dialogue with that. And then on the right, Indigo Gonzalez Miller, a local Afro-Indigenous artist, leading some in-gallery sort of pop-up conversations for our community day.
Well, we're coming to the end of our slides here, and I know we've covered a lot of ground, sort of very generally, and a deep dive into the Wonder School. But we're looking forward to fielding questions from you. Again, we're really admiring of the work that you're doing and that you're taking the time to do such thoughtful professional learning during this conference. It's been our pleasure to be here and to learn so much from the work that you do here, and to take back what we've learned to our own institution. We believe deeply that the capacities that we're building through the arts will enable us to envision and to bring about the kind of world we want to see. So we're happy to take questions. If you want to talk more about these programs or other work that we've done at various institutions, we look forward to fielding those in just a few minutes. But again, thank you for having us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Brooke and Jen, please come and join me on the red chairs. Thank you so much for sharing that insight with us into your wonderful museum. I'm sure we're all planning trips to Ohio quickly.
We would be happy
now.
to host you.
But how inspiring to hear about an organisation that is so firmly centred in responsibility to community and to creativity and to civic mindedness. We'll really think a lot about that in the days and months to come. So thank you so much. We've got a wonderful selection of questions here, so I'll just jump in, and Brooke and Jen, maybe you can determine how to respond. But can you speak a little about the value of working with artists as educators or as teaching artists in learning programs for diverse audiences?
I mean, it's huge, and it's something that the field in the U.S. is really reckoning with right now. What do the educators look like? What backgrounds do they bring? And I'd say that we have plenty of work to do. For the past 15 years, and this is going to sound like I'm dodging, and I hope it doesn't, for the past 15, 20 years, we have had a touring practice that is really inquiry-based and designed to create the conditions in which young people will share their own perspectives. So that, and having spaces where visitor voice gets real estate in the museum. And so we've really made a lot of progress in inclusion in that sense, but we still have some room to go in representation in the artists, the teaching artists we work with. We do have some good partnerships with organizations in town where we can help to find emerging and exciting young, especially BIPOC artists, teaching artists to come in for our studio programs. And it's been wonderful to pursue that. But yeah, it's something that we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Jen. I'm just choosing. Number three.
They're very thoughtful questions.
Yeah, very thoughtful questions.
Let's see.
Okay, well, maybe, yeah, Brooke, number two.
What strategies do you use at your museum to ensure it is a welcoming space for first-time visitors from your communities? I mean, I can lead off, but I've just, things that I've noticed in the months that I've landed, we offer a great deal of our introductory experiences at the museum in a multitude of languages. I think the museum has historically been quite responsive to the diversity of communities in Columbus and the Central Ohio region. And so many of our brochures and pickup materials are in a whole host of languages where there's deep representation in our community. And I thought that was, really well done and something we'll continue to do as much as we can across all publications. I think that's one thing that I noticed right away at the museum.
Yes, and yeah, it's the 7 highest frequency languages in our local school community school district, which is what we provide those in. And we have a heavy emphasis on visitor-centeredness in our training to make sure that people don't feel that they're being followed. We've probably you're all artists. I know this has happened. You've gotten too close to art, but just making sure that we are welcoming from every standpoint, and that you're not reading, someone mentioned this yesterday, that you're not reading a label that makes you feel, oh yes, Kelly mentioned, if you're reading a label that makes you feel like you should have a PhD, you're not gonna find that label on our walls. We work hard to make sure that everyone feels that they can access these complex ideas. They are, without dumbing them down, these are complex subjects, but with the right approaches, people can engage with them. So we just have to remember to find those right approaches.
Great, thank you.
I think that last one's interesting. I don't know if you have one.
I haven't
answer
looked.
to that one, Jen. The last one.
So our last question, what are some of the proudest moments you have in terms of participants and audiences?
Wow. This is really tough, and as soon as this ends, I'm going to think of a really perfect answer. But I'll share a recent one because I think it's also instructive for educators. So we were looking through some evaluation feedback forms that we'd gotten from teachers from one of our professional developments, and I was looking for some very specific things. And for whatever reason, I'm sure I was just in a bad mood, I was feeling kind of demoralized. And Kat Lynch, who I mentioned earlier, the lead teaching artist over Wonder School, comes to me and says, she taps on this feedback form from a teacher and says, this person just said, this experience has fed my soul and changed my approach to myself. And I was like, I just missed that because I was looking for something else. So.
Very interesting. I think we have time for one more. I feel like I'm hosting.
But
That
Brooke,
first one was,
can I interrupt? Do you have a proud moment from
Yeah.
your from your career,
oh,
beyond
throughout. I mean,
Columbus?
not yet Columbus. I mean, I feel like I'm still wrapping my arms around everything in Columbus. But let's see, what was a proud moment? I have to now remember the question from throughout my career. Goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, this is my first time leading an institution. This is the case study. I feel like all the work I've done to this point has prepared me for this role. And I'm quite excited to see how it all comes together. I worked across various departments and museums, starting in curatorial, working in education, on adult programming for many years, and then, which is quite unusual, then moving into fundraising, advancement, external affairs, strategy, planning, board development. Like, I just have moved all around a museum, and I think that's kind of atypical of a museum journey. But at the same time, it feels like this is the catalyst moment where it'll come together and kind of, yeah, I think this is what's so exciting about the opportunity at CMA.
Amazing, thank you.
So I think that proud moment's ahead of me, I guess is what I'm saying.
So we'll all be following you on Facebook and Instagram and see what the museum does into the future. Brooke, could you?
The last question.
The last question.
Yeah.
This is a thoughtful question. I'll leave it to you guys to choose who responds. Reimagining, repositioning, experimenting all come with an inherent risk of failure, which is not a bad word. Is there a failure that you could share? What was the outcome? And how do you manage outcomes and expectations?
I have so many, and I love to boldly share them with the teachers I work with. People who attended my breakout session heard me use the phrase toxic perfectionism probably a dozen times, because I think there is so much perfectionism in the field, and I am working through it. And one of the ways that I like to shape the learning communities that we have with teachers and with docents, which are volunteer tour guides, is to share the failures and what I learned from them all the time. A specific one isn't coming into mind right now, but one that often happens is when I have planned out an experience, maybe an in-gallery learning experience based on, the last group I had and what they did, and I'll sort of over-plan it, and I have this idea in mind of, oh, I'm sure they're going to say this, and so then I'll say this, and then we'll do this, and da-da-da-da-da. And then it doesn't start out that way, and so I get flustered, and I forget to tune into the learners who are actually with me and say, okay, well, but where is their learning? Where is their curiosity? And then build on that. So I would say that's kind of the largest category. And when it comes to having conversations about intense issues, overdue progress, all kinds of things, we really have to be willing to take a risk, willing to risk failure, and have the humility and courage to bounce back and not make it about our own feelings. And so I kind of just make everybody I work with be my therapist in doing that. And I hope that they learn something from that process too.
Amazing. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you so much. This has been great. Yeah.
Well, I have one final question. As I'm a museum educator, and I've, in my time worked on a number of projects with partnerships between schools and teachers and museums, and it's often a really interesting process because sometimes schools have a priority and the museum has a priority, and sometimes they're different. Do you have any perspectives on how to create the conditions for successful partnerships between museums and schools and education systems? Because it seems like your museum has done a really wonderful job at bringing all those stakeholders together.
Yeah.
Well, I have
Did you want to
just
speak to
an
that?
early
Yeah,
observation, but then you'll go deep because you've actually done this. And having just onboarded at the museum, I was very struck by the eagerness of many of the education and institutional leaders in our community to partner. And I think, the college presidents, all of the school district superintendents were quite welcoming to me, to the community. And I think it starts there, and I'm sure you have that same kind of collaborative experience with your colleagues and counterparts and peers. I do think our community is particularly open to collaboration, just as a kind of ethos. And that was clear, when I landed 6 months ago. All of the outreach from those institutions was just incredible.
Yeah, I think people can tell when you care, and not to say that that's all that it takes, but I think that it's also been important for us to stick to our mission with touring. So sometimes we get requests that just don't make sense for our skills and our focus. I'm teaching an English, an 11th grade English class, and I'm doing a unit on sonnets. Can you do an in-gallery experience where then they're going to write sonnets? And it's like, every so often we can make, and we do, sometimes we have partnerships where we will come up with custom experiences where we're really working with the teacher, but that is a lot of capacity and you can't really do that. But by sticking to, we're about developing thinking dispositions in targeted ways, and this is why this is how these thinking routines lead to this kind of thinking. This is what shows that it works, and this is how it connects to, we used to say like 21st century skills, but it's 2024 now. So, but this is how it connects with the skills that young people are going to need for success. As a result, there are some people who are going to not come to us for certain kinds of experiences, but they can always have those experiences on our own. If you want to come and do that sonnet experience, nothing's stopping you. We'd be happy to give you free admission to come and plan it out, be a sounding board. But this is what we do, and this is why we think it matters, and to be really firm in that. And I think, in a way that is respectful of people who want more of an arts integration or a curriculum tie-in, and also being able to point people to resources. Like we don't do math arts integration lesson plans, but we can do this, and this is why we think it matters, but if you really want this, here is a museum that has a really great version of that. So you're meeting people where they are, but you're also sticking to your mission. Sorry, that was a really long response to your question.
No, it's wonderful. It's just wonderful to hear so much about a museum that really centres learning and learners. And so thank you, both of you, for travelling all this way and for being here. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, thank you for
Thank you.
welcoming
Please join
us.
me in thanking Brooke and Jen. Thank you. So we're just going to take a little moment to reset while we prepare for our next presentation. So if you need to stand up and wiggle a little bit, you're very welcome. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I was so concerned about going over because I went way over. I was 10 minutes.